I'm really excited about this project. This was an undertaking of many months, and it is also work that we have done at our organization every other year for a number of years to try to map out the trends and paths forward for Maine. This was a really large project, and we will not have time today to really dive in and pull apart all of the recommendations. What I wanted to do was take an opportunity with us to sort of let folks know how it came to be, how we built the roadmap, how we paved it, if you will, um, where we got our information from, what we hope to do with it, and really just introduce the overall document so that as people go through it, they have a better sense of what they're looking at and where it all came from. So I'm going to share my screen and share a PowerPoint here. But we will also go ahead and put in the chat, Dania, if you have an opportunity to put a chat directly to the roadmap so that folks know where to find it on our website, and I can show you at the end as well. But let's see. Oh, yes, a bit about us before we dive into the roadmap. Folks generally are familiar with the Maine Women's Lobby. We were founded in 1978 to advocate for gender responsive public policy and feminist public policy in Maine. But the Education Fund sometimes is less understood. On the Education Fund side of our work is really focused on nonpartisan efforts to help people stay informed about public policy, to help people engage in public policy and have the confidence to do so. So you may be familiar with Girls Day in the State House. In 2021, we will be in our 25th year of that project, which is really exciting. We'll be going all virtual again for the second year, but that means that we can have almost twice the number of girls participating. We also do our biennial economic summit. Last year, that was a summit called Maine 2, and it was really about the intersection of sexual assault and sexual harassment with women's economic security, and had just this incredible, incredible speaker, the founder of the Me Too movement, which was really powerful to have her here in Maine. And of course, shout out to Kim Simmons, who was on this call and who really led the planning efforts for that. And then what we're here to talk about today, which is the policy roadmap for economic justice. So again, if you haven't yet shared your name and town in the chat, you can do that. And as we go along, think about what else you want to hear about and know about, because even though this year's roadmap is done, we really are just beginning to walk down the road of thinking about what other policy changes make a more gender equitable Maine. And I hope that we're doing many more kinds of research compilations like this. So this was my first effort at the roadmap, and I want to hear your feedback. So this is a really powerful quote that kicks off the roadmap, and it's right at the beginning of our introduction, because it's the kind of theme that we wanted to ground this work in. This is from Lisa Sakabason from Wabanaki Public Health. We've been conditioned to scarcity and conditioned to think that there isn't enough for all of us. What we're trying to promote, though, at least with their organization, is that there is enough. And the only way we will have enough is by working together and collaborating with each other. When we set out to build the roadmap this year, we wanted it to be grounded in data and research that was specific to Maine. So we looked at Maine census information, we looked at information from the Department of Labor, we looked at kids count from the Maine Children's Alliance. We also looked at state-specific breakouts from a number of national organizations. And anywhere we could find state-specific information, we tried to pull that together so that we were really rooting our work directly in information about Maine. We also wanted our proposals to be grounded in the real experiences of Mainers. So we reached out to a number of partners from across the state at both the state and local level. We invited 50 different organizations to participate in either an interview or a survey. We had over 30, I think actually at the last count, 36-ish participants in those interviews. And it really was the primary basis for our work forward. We specifically wanted to reach out to partners who do direct work within their communities so that we were having a connection to what's really happening on the ground in Maine. And so it was everything from, mano and mano in Millbridge to ILAP in Portland, which of course is statewide, to statewide data organizations like the Centers for Disease Control, School Health, and Adolescent Health Program. I know that there were many other organizations we could have invited to, and I hope that next time around we see twice this. And we wanted it to be grounded in policies that work. So we reached out to organizations that we have a lot of respect for at the national level, like the Institute for Women and Policy Research, and connected with them to make sure that we were tapping into the best available information. So when we put all of that together, we ended up pulling different sections. And in the past, the roadmap has really focused just on economic security. We understood that, people's economic security is connected to all aspects of their lives. So, health coverage and the ability to access health care that is quality and gender responsive is as much an economic issue as a physical issue. So we not only focused on economic security, but we wanted a whole picture of all of the areas that impact the lives of women and girls. So a number of sections, and they each include a data snapshot, quotes or information directly from community partners that we worked with, overarching observations or trends that come directly out of that data and out of what we were hearing from our partners, and then specific recommendations. In some cases, these are huge recommendations, and in some places, these are more tangible and immediate recommendations. Oops. Hello. Why? What's happening? All right. So when we started off, I expected that all of this work would be really rooted in the 5 key issue areas that we cover, and that was not the case. Fascinatingly, what I found was that as we pulled together all of the information from these interviews and the data, that there were overarching themes that ran through every single interview and across different topics and categories. We just had a couple of themes that could not be put into a box. And so, quite unexpected to me, we ended up putting a significant introduction together that talks about those specific themes that I think are some of which are fairly unusual for what would typically be like, a women's issues summary. So at the top of them, we did most of this work between June and September of this year. And so COVID-19 was absolutely at the top of everyone's mind. And really acknowledging how much the impact of COVID has unveiled what some of the worst gaps in our system. So for each of these, I'll try to include at least one of the quotes from our partners. But this is a really powerful one from Jess Maurer from Maine Council of Aging, talking about how COVID-19 has really shown the age discrimination that's present in our systems. The second major, checking in on the chat. The second major issue that came up, and which also makes sense in the context of summer of 2020, but that I hope is the part of the conversation every year, you know, moving forward, but recognizing the impact of systemic racism on people's lives, and the inclusion of systemic racism within all of our systems, and how that affects how people engage with systems. This quote from Whitney Parrish from Health Equity Alliance is really calling out that intersection between racial justice and health justice. And that's an important part of why, you know, this was an overarching theme. The next overarching theme was about our infrastructure and safety net. We heard again and again from partners about how our safety net is fragmented or siloed, or how sometimes systems conflict. You know, people trying to access services from one area, and in doing so, it might exclude them from services in another area. One of the key things that we heard in there was Maine care rates, and how Maine care rates really made accessing services for some people, particularly with a gender lens, a lot more difficult than I would have expected. I don't think I had a sense of Maine care rates being something that was uniquely related to gender. And one example of how that came out was hearing from our partners at Maine Transnet about how the ability to access gender affirming care through Maine Care had really expanded a lot of opportunities for folks in their community. And yet, because the rates are so low, there aren't enough providers offering those services. And so there's still the same practical impact on folks, which is that they're not able to access gender affirming services because of that fragmented service. Another thing that came up again and again was about physical infrastructure, housing, transportation, and broadband. I would say that at least 50% of the interviews that came forward for us were not about the services, but about the inability to access services, either because people couldn't use, you know, telehealth care services, for example, because they didn't have broadband, or because they couldn't get to the services because of transportation barriers. So that physical infrastructure, everywhere from the practical ability to access something, you know, through the kinds of wellness that's afforded by livable and walkable communities, that came up again and again. And finally, we heard from quite a number of partners about how, because Maine has a majority white population, or, you know, overwhelmingly white population, most of our data, our publicly available data, is in the aggregate, and that means that it's all pooled together, and we're not often splitting it out by subpopulations or subcommunities or regions. And that when we do so, we miss an opportunity to identify when systems are impacting some communities differently. And I have a pretty powerful slide later on that shows a difference, that when you pull data apart or disaggregate it, you get a really different picture of what's happening. We all know that's true around COVID-19 right now, right? So those are the key overarching trends that came out of this. In each of those different areas, we really worked to make sure that we were bringing forward the voices of the people having those experiences and then offering specific recommendations moving forward. I feel like I've been talking a lot. If folks have a question or comment that they want to chat in at this point, I'm happy to hear those or pause. Also, oops. All right. Also want to take a look, and if people have popped into where they live in the little map, we can take a look and see where we have people joining us from. So if you're over on the Facebook live stream and you want to click over to that Poll Everywhere link, you can let us know where you're joining from. And if you're here on this call, you can do so too, and then we will go ahead and show where people are from. So, all right. Great. Okay. So let's go ahead and come back to my slides, and we'll take a look at the different sections. So essentially the roadmap that we thought we'd be talking about when we started this project. The first area is around economic security. We broke this up into a number of different sections because it is such a big issue. So we focused on poverty and public benefits, focused on wage parity, on a number of other things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's one of the most powerful quotes in our collection. We had 15, 17 pages of quotes from partners. And this here from Dee Clark from Survivor Speak: no matter how you show up in the world, your race, your sexuality, your gender, it's traumatizing to be poor. So this slide, and you may not be able to see it very well, it's a snap from the page, but it's comparing the overall. This is a great example of how when we disaggregate data, we see a different picture. So these are the rates of people living in poverty in different communities. And overall, it's 11.6 in Maine, which is, terrible that that's more than 1 in 10 Mainers. And also, feels like a reasonable number. But when we look at the number of Native American or Indigenous people living in poverty in Maine, that number jumps to 35%. And it's just such an important reminder about being able to analyze our data based on subpopulations, and also by regions. The percent of poverty in Cumberland County is 9.7, and in Somerset County, it is more than twice that at 19.3. Oops, sorry, I stopped my screen share. Here's another slide. Even if you can't read this, this is showing the percentage of working Mainers who are living with economic security. So we know that just because you aren't in poverty doesn't mean that you are living with economic security. And the definition of economic security is really like having the means and resources to cover your basic needs. It is not living in middle class luxury, but the ability to afford your housing, your transportation, your food, and your childcare, essentially. But you can see here that all Mainers are over 70%. white Mainers are just about the same, and that plunges when we look at Black and African American Mainers. That disaggregation is so important. The purple number are women, and the gray are men. And so this way we're able to disaggregate not only by race or ethnicity, but also by gender. And you can see that on all but the Asian Pacific Islander category, women are less likely to experience economic security, no matter their race or ethnicity. Here's a comparison of the mean childcare worker salary against the living wage for an adult with one child in Maine. So when we think about economic security, are people even making enough money in order to meet their basic needs? And in the case of childcare workers, the answer is a definitive no. For housing and homelessness, here's a chart showing the difference between the percent of Maine, the population who are Black or African American, and as compared to the percentage of Black or African American people who experience homelessness in Maine. And also when we look at food insecurity, so you'll see on the left here the overall percentage of workers who are food insecure. So people who are employed and do not have enough food to meet their needs. But then when you compare it against certain professions, so personal health aides, for example, restaurant employees, grocery store workers, these are all frontline folks doing essential services, and they are less likely to be food secure than other Mainers. So out of this, and I've now just summarized 50 pages in 3 slides, but we have a number of recommendations, and as I said, they go everywhere from very large to very small. But across really these in the public and poverty and public benefits, 5 to 8 recommendations, but really focused on making sure that we're driving toward a living wage for all Mainers, not just a wage. In employment, wages and workplace benefits, really highlighting reducing the gender and race wage gap. Focusing on childcare, direct care, and caregiving, and shifting our understanding of childcare and caregiving to really the public good that it is. Our economy doesn't work and our families don't work when we don't support care and caregiving and caregivers. And so we need to think about it like a public good and build systems that ensure that those things are possible, including implementing paid family and medical leave. For housing and homelessness, continue to invest in low income and affordable housing. For food insecurity, we heard again and again about expanding the opportunity for choice and local decision making and cash-based options so that local communities and families are able to make the best decisions for themselves. That was one of the places actually we heard that even though we know that COVID-19 has increased food insecurity, for some families, because their cash supports have been increased through SNAP, they have more flexibility now than they've ever had before. We also heard that from Lisa Sakabason at Wabanaki Public Health, that because of COVID, they had an opportunity to make their own choices with nutrition supports so that they could access more fresh fruits and vegetables than they had ever been able to access before for their communities. Oops. I see. I see a comment. Pretty shocked by the comparison of childcare costs and higher ed costs by state. That's a great link in there, Kim. Thanks for sharing that. Mm. So in the health and wellness section, the economic security is the largest single section by far. But in the health and wellness section, we heard themes around being more gender responsive, across, and that doesn't just mean being more women focused. Gender responsive means gender responsive. And so whatever the requirements that folks need in terms of having gender affirming care, that was a theme that we heard again and again. So here's a great quote from Gia Drew from Equality Maine about the work that they're doing to make sure that in healthcare systems, providers are taking in the right data to be able to so here's a stats snapshot about the percent of Mainers who have not seen a dentist in the past year because cost is a barrier. Oops, sorry. There we go. What I find a really powerful image, this is the percent, the likelihood of Black women in the United States dying from pregnancy-related complications as compared to white women. They're 400% more likely. This is an example where we had to use a national statistic because we do not have enough Maine-based information that we were able to compare subpopulations. And it's an example of how we can do better because we know that mortality of Black and African American mothers is really a national tragedy right now. And we know very little about that specific to Maine. Until we have disaggregated data, we're unlikely to know more. On the mental health, substance use, and well-being, here's another one where we've pulled out by both race or ethnicity down the left-hand side. We've also added in sexual orientation and gender identity. And you'll see the comparison again for purple for women and gray for men. But this is a percent of folks who have experienced suicide ideation in the last 12 months. And you'll see these low ones in here, or lower ones, are white, Black, multiple races, and heterosexual folks, and Asian and Pacific Islanders. But when we scroll down and look at gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth, we see just huge, huge increases in suicide ideation of adolescents, and particularly so among female identifying lesbian, bisexual, and trans youth. I think this is a really powerful slide because it just shows us that the way that mental health is being impacted really matters based on race, ethnicity, and gender identity. These are from the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, which is my very favorite data set in Maine. Oh, I froze. Am I back? Okay. But if you are a data geek and you really want to see awesome pieces of data pulled out by race, ethnicity, and by gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation, the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey is the best game in town. So in the health section, we really, at the top of this, it's the only one where we made a single overarching recommendation, and that is to implement universal health care for all. We also want Maine Care to work for more Mainers. We would like to see more support for maternity and postpartum care. And one of the recommendations of the several there is to extend Maine Care coverage through the first year after birth. It currently stops after 60 days. For reproductive justice, making sure that people at any income level can access abortion care services if they need them. And to infuse more gender responsive systems into our healthcare and our mental health and wellness systems, because we saw on that chart how powerful the differences between for mental health between different populations based on gender identity. For civil rights and freedom from discrimination, this is an example, a pie chart that shows us how the discrimination complaints stack up at the Maine Human Rights Commission. And so disability claims are the largest single basis for discrimination complaints, followed by retaliation, whistleblowers, and sex discrimination. I will say we are not able to get this information disaggregated by gender identity. And that's another example of where we can begin to do Maine-based work, but there are real barriers until we're able to see publicly available disaggregated data to make decisions with. And one of our top priorities in the civil rights and discrimination realm is to work on the Maine Human Rights Act to ensure that it is consistent across the act. There are a few key inconsistencies, particularly around gender identity. Right now, sexual orientation is included across the act, but gender identity is not. Freedom from violence was a significant section for us. This is a slide that shows the number of women 18 and over who've experienced sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by a partner in their lifetime. So this is not having experienced intimate partner or sexual violence or stalking overall, but simply experiencing them by a partner, an intimate partner in their lifetime, and it's 40%. We know when we add in those experiences by any perpetrator, that number climbs to about twice that. We included in the freedom from violence section both sexual and intimate partner violence, and we included a section on carceral and state violence. And this shows the difference between the number of women in Maine jails in 1970 and the number of women in Maine jails in 2015, which was the most recent year that we were able to find that data from. The population has not grown this much in those intervening years. But the population of people who are incarcerated, women who are incarcerated in Maine, really has. And it's had a profound effect on mental health and family well-being. So some of our recommendations here are really focused on not just, I think that when we think of intimate partner and sexual violence, we often think of remedies after the violence has occurred. We are both suggesting that we have a greater investment in prevention, but also that the remedies need to include economic stability, that many survivors are able to reduce the violence that they experience if they have more economic stability. And additionally, investing in alternate forms of services and justice. That's particularly important when we're thinking of gender responsive services, because not every survivor either gets quality response from the mainstream criminal justice system, nor does every survivor want it. And we need to focus on decreasing the criminalization of nonviolent crimes, such as drug crimes. These are deeply connected with trauma and the experience of violence over the lifetime. And for us, it feels important to map out that connection between the experience of trauma and then subsequent mental health issues and or substance use, and then the related criminalization of those behaviors. And finally, we know that all of these different aspects of people's lives are really impacted by government systems. And we know that women need to have representation in those systems, not just in the legislature, but everywhere that decisions are being made that affect the lives of women and girls. So this is a comparison of female appointees in the two most recent federal administrations. So in the Obama administration, 42% of judicial appointees were women and only 25% in the Trump administration. And we know that the judiciary makes powerful decisions that affect our lives. And, you know, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, she'll be satisfied when there are 9. But I think we can at least try to do better than 25%. And frankly, I think we can do better than 42%. And in this area, we recommend continuing to prioritize accessible, free, and fair elections for all Mainers. And that includes continuing to ensure that some of the steps that we took to make the election accessible and open for Mainers during COVID continue into the future. Steps such as online registration, making it easier to vote early, etc. So this is the enormous list of the many community partners who did work to support this. It was a really powerful group, and I'm extremely grateful that people were willing and able to share their wisdom and their experiences to contribute to this report. And that includes some of you on this call, and also, you know, anyone who is now going to take this information and integrate it into their thinking about what health and wellness and security means for women in Maine, women and girls in Maine. So the full report is available at our website. It's mainewomen.org. And we are absolutely thrilled to have questions, comments, feedback, other things that you'd like to see, because I think that this was a great report and a great opportunity, and I already have 27 more ideas about how it could be better next time around, and I hope that you have 57 more ideas about how it could be better next time around. So let's see. Next up, I'm going to head over and see. Let's see.
Dusty, can I ask a question?
Please, I would be delighted.
Hi, folks. For those of you who don't know me, I serve in the state Senate and I live in Cumberland County. Dusty, do you have legislation that syncs up with these priorities and sponsors who are going to be putting in some bills to get at some of these recommendations?
I think that's a great question, Senator Brian. I appreciate you asking it. What I've been trying to do so far, there are a couple of areas where things came up so often and felt so important and or are so mission driven for our organization that the answer is a definitive yes. And I would say at the top of that list is making steps toward understanding how to implement a system of paid family and medical leave in Maine. Otherwise, though, there are about 45 to 55 recommendations in this. And so I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what pieces of legislation are going forward and then make a connection between the recommendations in the roadmap and then the legislation that is moving forward. But we are not necessarily bringing all of that forward. And to be frank, won't necessarily be able to even, do active work or support all of it in our very modest organization. I do
Okay.
hope to connect, though, like our recommendations with legislation that exists. But some of the recommendations, like implementing universal health care, might be another, 18 to 24 months.
Hey, Dusty, great presentation. Thank you. What are some of the organizations that you could potentially collaborate with on specifically issues around domestic violence, economic and food insecurity? I mean, there are, this is that classic case of siloed issues and people are working to end something, but not enough collaboration. And what can you do to inform me a little bit more about how we can collaborate?
Thank you for that question. And I agree. I think that collaboration is really important. I also think that from my perspective, so I come from many years working in anti-sexual violence. And I think that by some standards, I would be considered an expert on that issue. And yet, I took my lead from what I heard from the providers on the ground. So in that role, my task was to represent the providers on the ground, and by extension, the survivors that they served. Survivors are the experts in their own lives and experiences, and providers then are experts in what they observe as trends and patterns. So my role in doing that work was to listen to them. I think that in the work that the Women's Lobby, I think, can do is to listen to the people who are experts in their lives and experiences. And that is why I wanted that to be the first piece that we moved forward in this roadmap. Because frankly, I am, of our 3 staff, none of us are experts in this whole collection. I think that we all, collectively will do better at moving some of these pieces forward when we are keeping our ear to the ground on different areas and hearing from the people who are having these experiences in their lives, and then the people who are providing the services. So for example, childcare is, critically important for most aspects of family stability, and also the economy. The people I want to hear from are the Child Care Association, representing small daycare providers across Maine. I can make things up, but I want to know what they need. What will make a tangible difference in their lives? What are they experiencing? How are the systems working for them? And so this is a very long answer, Betsy, to that question, but I think that, none of us can do all of the things. The area that we want to be doing work in, if, for instance, it's childcare or sexual violence, the first place to go is to listen to the folks, to take their lead, to ask how we can support, and then at least for our organization to think about what are the particular and unique kind of skills or resources that we can bring to the table to help drive that work forward.
Can I chime in too? This is Jay, and I serve in the House. In terms of the siloing, it's a huge challenge, and from the legislators' perspective, having advocacy groups help when we're trying to move legislation forward makes all the difference in the world. And the Women's Lobby has been one of the great advocacy groups that I've counted on. And the roadmap is just incredibly helpful. So thank you for all that work. I guess my suggestion is in that collaborative work that you're doing with the other organizations, that connection you're talking about with legislative efforts is going to be really helpful in making sure that legislation can get to the finish line, because it's a lift. And I agree with you 100%. We're looking at the experts and pulling those experts together, because I had a job once where I was called a generalist in social work. Nobody knows everything. I hated that title. But we pulling the different advocates together is what I'm doing. Is I'm working on legislation now, and I'm sure the other legislators are doing the same thing. And we need your help. So thank you for pulling all this together for the roadmap and continuing to do that work. And, we'll be calling on you. So thank you.
Good. I hope you'll be calling on us. 'Cause I really think that to the extent that we're working together and, legislators have different roles and responsibilities than advocates, and there are so many ways those can intersect to bring forward really good solutions for Maine. So I'm excited to learn from you all and to be partners at the table. Any other questions, comments, considerations?
I'm seeing in the chat, was it Kim bringing up an interesting question about the wage report? Do you see that?
Oh, yeah.
I was just asking, this is Kim, there was just on NPR about, they called it mask harassment. I can't get the words out quite right, but the connection between sort of the pandemic and the push on essential workers, and in this case, restaurant workers, to continue serving and being so at the hands of, people tipping, and just talked about how in states that have gotten rid of the tipped minimum wage, there is lower rates of sexual harassment at work. And so I was just curious. I know, we had, I don't know, we had I thought we already had a bill about this, but I lost track. So I was just curious if anyone knows if there will be a bill on that really particular thing this session.
There have been several efforts to end the tipped minimum wage, and I don't think they've gone anywhere. I know that there is discussion for this session, proposal potentially to end the tipped minimum wage, but also a proposal to enhance the definition of what constitutes a tipped worker. So essentially to provide a floor, you have to earn a certain amount in tips in order to be considered a tipped worker, which I think is sort of a clever way to address that.
I think about it, we had, I'm going to forget her name, but the person some economic summits ago who talked about how tipped workers were left out on purpose as a kind of racist, a deal that Southern Democrats made in the Fair Wage Act federally, and then so years of talking about this one issue, and still it's so hard to resolve. And so I guess I'm looking both for a pep talk of how do we stick with something that the problem has been documented very, very, often. No one really doesn't know that it's a problem. So it feels well, people don't care that it's a problem. So I'm curious, both from an advocate and from the representatives on the call, how do you fight that sense of despair that we should just all, we just have to do it ourselves, like that nobody really cares?
I don't know if any of the other folks on the call want to respond to that.
Hi, this is Representative Millette. I was there when we were trying to fight to remove the tipped, to protect the tipped wage workers. The opposition was really fierce from businesses. So when the minimum wage referendum passed and we were working on implementation, that's something that we weren't able to get over the finish line. But I would say that there are a bunch of us who are very well aware of that issue and want to see it resolved. It's a matter of getting not just the legislative chambers in agreement, but also the executive branch.
Yeah, I thought that was, there was a referendum, the minimum wage referendum included a tip wage, to do away with the tip wage. And Representative Millette was in the Senate at the time, and she and I both fought long and hard to keep it, but we were in the minority at the time, and we lost. So I don't know if there are bills coming up. The deadline to submit bills is a week from Friday, December the 18th. And they don't really come out. The bill titles don't come out until January, I think. So the answer is there could be, but right now we don't know if there's a bill on tipped wage. Or I don't. I'll speak for myself.
Well, I do want to say thank you to both of you. And, the not giving up part is obviously really important. So thank you for your ongoing service, and losing leads to winning. So I'll give myself the pep talk.
And Kim, I will definitely check in to make sure that there's a bill in on that.
Yeah, I would think that with the pandemic, that would highlight the importance of this legislation because of the disappearance of the infrastructure within the restaurant industry right now. I mean, and now's the time to really get after that one.
The pandemic has revealed so much that we all knew was right under the surface, and it's just put it all right out there, and obviously disproportionately affected women because we're in direct care, direct service, face-to-face positions across the economy. So, I was just on a Zoom with hospice and home health this morning, about Maine care reimbursement rates. It's all those professions that have face-to-face interactions with people are dominated by women teaching, low wages, and they've been really, really vulnerable in this pandemic.
Yeah, that's why I find the collection of our voices around these issues is so paramount to amplify the importance, and hopefully you wonderful women legislative whores will be there and able to make a difference and really push these forward. I know that people in the Mid-Coast community are ready, willing, and able to support, and Desi and I talked about dreaming and scheming. So just want to keep the hope alive because, man, it's hard. It's really hard times. And, my role, I've been president of United Mid-Coast Charities in the Camden Rockport area for the past year, and 40-fold increase in homelessness as a direct result of domestic violence for New Hope for Women. I mean, all the statistics are coming in, and it really is horrifying. And one thing slips, you get into a domestic violence situation, kids get displaced, education, we all know there's a huge ripple effect. So thank you for doing this work, Dusty, and everybody. Let's keep the faith and do what we can.
And just to respond to Kim too, that it does get incredibly discouraging at times. You're working on policy that just is so obviously important and makes sense, and the opposition can throw you for a loop. It's a real battle, like the tip minimum wage is an example, addressing people who are displaced and don't have a home to live in, people trying to work on recovery without a place to live, on and on and on. And the efforts are intense and strong, but the siloing doesn't help. And that's where, when we can cross over, it's a good thing, but you still, like the tip wage, the business community was horrible on that. Just, they advocate just as hard as advocates for it. So we have to keep dreaming and scheming, and and the other thing is, legislation is a slow process, but you can't give up. There are lots of bills we could point to that took 4 tries to get through. Shouldn't be that way when that's something you believe in, but it is.
Every iteration is another educational cycle. So you finally get there.
And then you have new legislators.
Right.